I have given way too much thought into how to start this video. Sometimes you are so familiar with something that no matter how much you love it, and you do genuinely love it, it's easy to take it for granted. Your favorite song doesn't always slap as hard as it used to. Your favorite movie becomes a quote fest that you kind of just talk through. Maybe your favorite game becomes something that you do to pass the time and you try to speed through the grindy parts just because, well, you've done it a million times before. How do you fight this? How do you try to be present and focused on something that you've done a million times, that you've heard a million times, something you've played a million times? That's where I have to start. I have to ask myself, how can I appreciate the game that really started it all for me? I've played and loved video games for so many years, but that love had to really start somewhere. So how? How do I truly pay respect to the video game that made me fall fully in love with video games? How do I do a video essay about Final Fantasy Tactics? The two lovely genres of tactical games and RPGs were both well established by the time 1997 forced its way into our lives. Dragon Quest, released in 1985, established JRPGs in the video gaming world. 1987's Final Fantasy had spread that love for JRPGs into the West, and in the same year, the Megami Tensei series started working within the shadows. The concept of tactical video games, much like the RPGs themselves, drew tremendous influence from tabletop games of yesteryear, like Risk, the original 100-hour game. By 1997, my own love of video games had started to develop, helped tremendously by various titles from the RPG and RTS genres. Final Fantasy VII, of course, would bring the Final Fantasy series screaming into the general public eye, but you don't get to the 7th game in a series by accident. I was also hooked on strategy games because of the countless hours spent playing 1993's Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, and the significantly better Warcraft 2, Tides of Darkness. Although I will say that to this day, nothing from any of the Warcraft games hits quite as hard as that beautiful phrase, "In the age of chaos, two factions battled for dominance." I don't remember what year it was that I actually finally put eyes on Final Fantasy Tactics. I didn't own a PlayStation, but my childhood friend Mark did, and I was at his house one day when he showed me the opening tutorial battle of the game, and that was it. I was hooked almost immediately. I distinctly recall sitting in his living room playing the first few battles of the game, awed by the control and the style and the look of these little sprites, the jobs that they could do, the abilities they had. The customization aspect is really what grabbed me and still grabs me to this day, because if there was something I loved more than RPGs or tactical games, it was storytelling, even when I was young. It was imagination, the ability to create whatever little backstory I wanted to for these little sprites, whatever little tale I wanted to make up that they were living within the grander narrative of the game. I had the freedom to do that in Final Fantasy Tactics. And actually to this day, whenever I replay the game, one of the first things I do is I hire a random character that I name after myself, so that no matter how many story characters I recruit as I go through the storyline, I'll always have this one guy who is uniquely whoever I want him to be, with whatever made-up backstory I want to give him. I think it's pretty easy to see that I fell in love with this game almost immediately, dreaming of one day being able to fully play it for myself. I purchased the Prima Strategy Guide well before I ever got the game, just so I could stare at all of the characters and classes and all the good pictures and all those sprites that I'd already fallen in love with. I almost had the strategy guide memorized. I even still have that strategy guide to this day. And anytime I replay the game, I pull it out and follow along with it. The edges are frayed. It costs $15 according to the price tag on the back. Bought it from Electronics Boutique, which I believe was in North Park Mall at the time, up in Ridgeland, Mississippi. I remember all this. I've told this story on this channel 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, I don't know. But when my parents bought us a PlayStation 2 as a Christmas gift, in the year 2000, I convinced my mom to drive me to Toys R Us so I could purchase a PlayStation Greatest Hits copy of Final Fantasy Tactics. It was the first game that I wanted to buy to go with that system, and it wasn't even a PlayStation 2 game. I played it so much that the disc eventually stopped working through just damage, wear, and tear over the years, but I held on to it. In fact, I've got it sitting right here. I still have my original non-functioning PlayStation Greatest Hits disc copy of Final Fantasy Tactics, along with its replacement that I had to buy once the original stopped working. I don't have any good reason for hanging on to any of this, but I felt the need to keep it. I felt the need to keep all of it. Final Fantasy Tactics has seemingly always been a part of me. It continues to be so to this day, some sort of a safe space for me to return to whenever I need it. It means enough to me that, to be quite honest, I don't know how to talk about it. It's like a familial relationship, or the expression of true, genuine love, or a location that has deep spiritual meaning to you. It's something that carries weight, and enough weight that it seems impossible to summarize it, to do it any sort of justice when you try to explain it to somebody else. It makes you nervous to try to explain these things to somebody. Something that means enough to you that you don't want them to misunderstand, that you would really love for them to appreciate it on the level that you appreciate it, and you kind of know that they won't, and if they won't, that it's going to hurt you. It makes you nervous. It makes me nervous to try to talk about it. It makes me nervous to try to make this video. A lot of things make me nervous to try to do these days. I first wrote this voiceover script on July 22nd, 2021. I didn't intend to wait so long to record it, I promise I didn't. It's just that once I started writing it, I felt as though I wrote it all far too quickly, that I was too formulaic in my descriptions of things in the game, too regimented in how I tend to structure these voiceover scripts. It all felt wrong. I felt like I needed to make this perfect, because this thing meant so much to my video gaming life that I felt like it deserved a perfect script, a perfect video. I also didn't have the desire in me at the time to replay the game, which I know is kind of stupid considering I've played it a billion times throughout my life. I shouldn't need to replay it, but if I was going to do a video on it, I wanted to at least be able to jump in and replay the game, to play through it, to have it fresh in my mind in order to give it the respect that it deserved. What I'm trying to say about all of this is that my heart at the time just wasn't in it. Not then, at least, and I'm not 100% sure that I'm really ready to make this video now. Some things are worth enough that you want to handle it properly. You don't want to rush it. You pour yourself into it when you know that you are ready to do so. When you know that you're ready to make that step. Or maybe more accurately, you wait until you need it. Wait until it's not something that you feel like you have to do, but it's something that you need within your core to do. Until it's not a chore to revisit the past, it's a necessity. Can't repeat the past? Well, of course you can, old sport. Okay, let's actually talk about the gameplay a little bit and get away from the anecdotes, because yes, some things are so important that you want to handle them carefully, to handle them properly, but that didn't always apply to the development of Final Fantasy Tactics. If I'm going to talk about the game itself and the gameplay of FF-15, I have to say this first. Like any beautiful thing, Final Fantasy Tactics is also deeply flawed. Discerning viewers will probably notice that the footage used in this video is, for the most part, not from the original PlayStation version of the game. Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions was a PSP reissue of the game that happens to play really well on the PSP emulator PPSSPP. Yes, that's the name of it. It plays in 16:9 resolution, so it works better in the interest of video essay making to fill up the whole screen. I don't feel any sort of guilt about emulating this game. I know emulation is a bit of a gray area, but I obviously have purchased multiple copies of the original PlayStation game. I've purchased the PSP game. I purchased a PlayStation Vita just to be able to play the PSP game. I've purchased the Android port of the game. I've bought this game so many times that I just can't be bothered to feel guilty about it. I just wanted to be upfront with you so that when you're mad at me in the comments, I can remind you that you have no ground to stand on. In general, the gameplay of the game surrounds battles set up on grid maps. These maps are floating in empty space. You position 5 units on the maps, and then you battle enemies while navigating the environments that are given to you. Each unit's turn consists of a movement phase and an action phase, similar to anything you would have normally gotten in, say, a Dungeons & Dragons encounter. Each unit has a speed rating that essentially determines their initiative in battle, and you can check the order of actions to see who goes in what turn, so you can try to figure out when to prepare spells that take time to charge, or other sort of techniques or abilities. Each unit also has Faith and Brave ratings, which determine their effectiveness with magic and physical skills. I say all this really quickly because it already brings up 2 of the major issues that this game had to deal with: the unit count and the spell casting limitations. Technological limitations in the mid-90s meant that there was no way to reliably include more than 5 party members per battle due to a limit on how many sprites they could fit on the screen without the game just breaking. But you know what, that's all good. 5 is a pretty solid number of units for a battle. It's a good round number. Except a lot of the story missions require you to use an AI-controlled guest unit, which means that the 5th spot in your party is typically occupied with an AI unit that you can't directly control. Oh, and the story battles also require that you use the main protagonist, Ramza, in all of them, which means that you're only free to really select typically 3 of your party units to use when placing units at the start of a battle. This cuts down a bit on the entire purpose of improving all of the units in your party, although there are still a ton of extra battles and random encounters, so you do have time to use everyone if you want. But even then, you realize pretty early on that you tend to have 3-4 units that you focus on developing. But then come the spells. Anyone who's ever played this game will tell you that nearly any spell at all, even the most simple, but especially the big summons or the huge time-consuming spells, cause intense frame rate drops and horribly stuttering gameplay. What's interesting is this issue wasn't even really fixed in that 2007 reissue of the game on the PSP. However, one of the benefits to playing it on the PSP emulator is that there are mods that fix that frame rate issue, and it really improves combat quite a bit. That's one of the fascinating things about this game. At this point, the quote-unquote best way to play Final Fantasy Tactics is probably to emulate it, with a few quality of life mods installed to help these issues that came about in development. Issues like the frame rate drops, issues like being able to control the AI guest units, because the AI is abysmally stupid. They're so dumb. That brings up maybe the 3rd biggest problem with this game. It's never really been fixed. It's available on phones, on the PSP, on emulators, but at no point has a proper remaster been done that matches the technological advancements that we now have. Yes, the PSP War of the Lions version added some cutscenes, extra battles, and controversially, I might add, changed the dialogue to a vaguely Shakespearean dialect, but most of the game is, at its core, the exact same game that was released in 1997. I think there's a reason for that. The things that Final Fantasy Tactics does well, it does amazingly well. The battles are fun and feature little details that can appease any strategist. Each character has those Brave and Faith stats that have pros and cons built in. Like, for example, if you have a high Faith level, not only are your spells more powerful when you cast them, but it also makes you take more damage from spells that are cast against you. A low Faith will make your melee fighters more difficult for enemy spellcasters to eliminate, but it also means that if you cast a healing spell on them, they won't heal for nearly as much as your more faithful units. There are a lot of tactics put into this game. There's a reason why this game is kind of often considered the benchmark for tactical RPGs. Needing to keep these tactics fresh in your mind is great if you're meticulously maneuvering your way through every battle, but you don't always want to be so meticulous all the time. And that's fine, because the game also had some AI instructions that you can assign to your characters so they auto battle in a certain way. And these are, oddly enough, the AI instructions that kind of work, unlike the AI controlled guest units. I don't want to harp on that subject anymore. What I'm saying is that there's an easy way to play through every battle while playing to your strengths as a player. For example, I'm not always great at planning out those really detailed magical attacks because they require precise timing that I, quite frankly, tend to miscalculate because I'm an idiot. I typically like to put my mages or my healers on AI strategies that work with the spellcasting, and then I directly control my melee or ranged fighters, and I have a lot of fun doing it that way. Of course, the battlefields themselves are unique in their design, with designer-director Yasumi Matsuno drawing inspiration from dioramas. That's right, dioramas like you used to have to make in grade school. Matsuno had developed the general look and feel of these dioramas in 1995's Tactics Ogre, a similar style game in the Ogre Battle series, and then he was hired to do the same sort of tactical RPG but in the Final Fantasy franchise. And either because of the name recognition on an international level that Final Fantasy had developed at that point compared to Ogre Battle, or maybe just the overall quality of the game, Final Fantasy Tactics really took off and set the tone for tactical RPGs, much more so than Tactics Ogre actually did, even though Tactics Ogre has a very strong and understandably strong cult following. There are big fan bases for both those games, and it's worth noting that Tactics Ogre, of course, just got a modern reissue. For my money, which I'm not offering to you, having played both, Final Fantasy Tactics kind of just works better as a game in general. It's more approachable because Tactics Ogre is a brutally unforgiving game. So if you want to give the tactical RPG genre a try and you haven't tried it before, Tactics is just more accessible, even if you have to kind of play it like through an emulator or through the PSP or on your phone, since it ain't on Steam, and that's a crime. Anyway, the idea of the diorama aesthetic was the inspiration for this rotating 3D grid look and the paper mache-esque textures, which became iconic and functional enough that the general design is used in pretty much any tactical RPG even to this day. Like right now, if you wanted to, you could get on your phone and download the free Final Fantasy game War of the Visions, and it has the exact same sort of 3D grid battlefield look. Final Fantasy Tactics was also one of the games that kept featuring the familiar Final Fantasy job system, harkening back to the foundation of the series before it kind of started to move away from jobs and focused more on distinct characters whose skills were a trend that really took off with Final Fantasy VII. In Tactics, a character can bounce around between jobs based on their skills, and getting better at some jobs opens up the pathway to take on more advanced jobs. And one of those particularly awesome parts of the customization of all this is that these characters can be customized with skills learned from previous jobs, giving you as the leader, the general, the creator of the party, the ability to make really overpowered units. Would you like to create a heavily armored knight who can also move with the freedom of a more noble thief? Yeah, you can set that up if you learn the thief job's movement skills. How about creating a mage that can wield a gun? Yeah, absolutely. What about creating a bard that isn't useless? Yeah, well, you know what, it's a common joke, but the bard and dancer jobs in Final Fantasy Tactics are actually kind of awesome jobs. But you can make them even cooler by giving them the ability to fly. That's part of the major charm of Final Fantasy Tactics. It's the ability to approach the gameplay, the battles, in a seemingly limitless amount of ways. For someone like me, that's what I want in a game. That's what I live for in a game. That's what I crave in a video game. I have zero interest in meticulous boss fights that you have to have perfect timing and a perfect formula for. I'm sorry, I know Elden Ring is a great game. It's not the game for me. The game for me came out 25 years ago. But what good is gameplay and game mechanics, as good as they might be, if there's no plot behind it? Actually, you know what? Never mind that. Minecraft, Fortnite, reality TV, plot doesn't matter. But just bear with me. Final Fantasy Tactics does what very few Final Fantasy games can accomplish, telling a very good, yet still understandable story. If you've subscribed to this channel for a while, then first of all, wow, I apologize. But also it means there's a chance that you watched my video essay about Final Fantasy XII. So you are aware that the Final Fantasy realm of Ivalice is my favorite Final Fantasy setting. For most of the series' history up until about Final Fantasy VI, the world of Final Fantasy had, for lack of a better term, existed in a traditionally high fantasy setting. It was fairly medieval, it had monsters and black magic and wizards and knights. When they got to 6, they decided to change up the setting a little bit and embark in a bit of a new direction with a a little bit more steampunkish or industrial revolution setting. Then, of course, you got to the uber-modern and dystopian Final Fantasy VII, which was such a massive success that Square Enix stuck with those massive over-the-top worlds in the following games and never really looked back to their traditional high fantasy roots, at least in the mainline games, because you had something like Tactics, which proved to be a great opportunity for keeping the high fantasy and medieval setting alive while still introducing some steampunk elements that had become popular in those days. Well, mostly they wanted to keep airships around. The only thing that Final Fantasy series love more than the name Cid is an excuse to include airships in their games. Thus, the world of Ivalice was created with chocobos, warring medieval kingdoms, magic, and okay, yeah, there's a dude named Cid in it too. The appeal of Ivalice, I think, largely comes from the fact that it maintained the high fantasy look and feel that the series was founded on, even while the mainline titles were developing into something different. Ivalice was Square Enix's way of sort of paying homage to its past. In the era of Ivalice that Tactics takes place in, we live in the shadow of a long war, the aftermath of which has lingering ramifications. The king has died, and his possible heirs are either an adopted princess or a true-born son who is an infant and would need a regent to rule for him. Two powerful dukes, Larg and Goltana, decide to claim the protection of these two possible heirs, thereby seizing power for themselves. While there's not an out-and-out war for the throne between these two dukes quite yet, the political tension is thick, like real nasty thick. Meanwhile, there's also an underlying class conflict brewing, as ye old common folk have gotten pretty tired of the upper class kind of just being jerks. There's a strong plot point in the first act of the game in which the commoners are struggling against the aristocracy because the commoners were the ones sent into the war to die at each other's hands and then were cast off by those in power as soon as this conflict ended. It's essentially that the common people now have to deal with still being poor, still having to struggle for meals, and with the knowledge that they went to war against basically their own brothers and sisters in a way, while the aristocracy never really had to get their hands dirty. All of this is a plotline that went way over my head back in the 1990s, but it resonates a lot more today, especially with how we see so many soldiers who find themselves grappling with PTSD or feeling cast off by their governments that they fought for after they've outgrown their usefulness. So with this tension brewing in Ivalice, small revolts are popping up around the kingdom at the same time that these backhanded political maneuvers are being orchestrated behind the scenes by Duke Larg and Duke Goltana, only serving to escalate the anger between the aristocratic class and the common class. But all of this is known recorded history in the world of Ivalice, as the story of Final Fantasy Tactics is being told several years later from the perspective of a historian going back through old documents. But history is written by the victors. In this case, the victors recognize a working class hero who rose above the treachery of the dukes to become king and bring peace to the kingdom. His name, Delita Hyrule, and he is your best friend in this story. That's right, the main character of Final Fantasy Tactics is not the historical hero of the kingdom, as you play as Ramza Beolve, a child of the highly respected Beolve family who was branded a heretic and erased from recorded history. And in the first two acts of the game, you as Ramza try to deal with the ensuing war between these rival dukes, only to be greeted with a massive plot twist at the end of the second act. If you're interested in preserving the plotline of this nearly 25-year-old video game, then skip ahead about 2 minutes. I'll put a timer up here. By the way, I'm making it a point to get this video out in 2022. 25 years since the release of this game. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't finish this video until 2023. If you've ever watched any anime or really played any JRPG, then at some point you've seen this typical trope of, oh, here's a bad guy, and then late in the story we discover, oh, he's actually being granted inhuman strength from some sort of demonic source. It happens all the time in anime or JRPGs, where it's never just a good guy versus a bad guy. There's always some supernatural powers at play. It's one of the things that we love about these stories. Well, Final Fantasy Tactics does my favorite iteration of that trope. The primary religion in the Kingdom of Ivalice is the Church of Glabados, who worships Saint Ajora and his 12 powerful warriors known as the Zodiac Braves. This is all a lie. Saint Ajora and the Zodiac Braves were nothing more than human hosts for demonic beings known as the Lucavi. And 1200 years after the Lucavi walked the earth, they're now using the church leaders as new hosts to re-enter the world and try to take over. The church uses and actually masterminds all of the political turmoil in order to help the Lucavi track down proper host for their leader, Ajora. Ramza unearthed this entire conspiracy while trying to deal with the warring dukes, and this conspiracy has allowed the church to secretly take power from the crown and orchestrate an entire civil war. Ramza decides he has to stop their nefarious plot, and that's why he's branded a heretic and erased from recorded history. And what makes the story even better and even more layered is that you don't ever stop dealing with the original storyline and this whole battle for succession either. Ramza has to deal with the dukes, the class conflicts, the betrayal of his best friend Dalida, and the church all at once in a beautifully layered storyline. And don't forget that in the telling of the story, history doesn't even acknowledge that your main character does all of this to stop this supernatural threat, nor does it mention anything about the corruption of the church and the false gods that the religion worships. It's worked into the lore of the game that what you work so hard to do is forgotten entirely because the politics of the day decide to honor a man who rose from commoner to king. And he's not even who history claims he is either. He's no hero. Dalida turns out to be a scoundrel. This is a wonderful plot. It's impossible to sum it up quickly in one video. It's worth playing the whole game. I'll end this discussion of the plot by saying that it's really, really good, but also unlike so many great Final Fantasy games, it actually is coherent. It actually makes sense. It's an epic high fantasy tale that would make George R.R. Martin wish he had known it so he could steal the plot and, learn to actually finish a story. I mentioned earlier that I wrote this script in July of 2021. Then I let it sit for a year and a half. 2021 and then 2022 were weird years for me. More than any other years in my adult life, it felt as though time flew, that days blended together, that weeks became months, months became the year, and all the while I never really even noticed. The year started, before I knew it, the year had ended, we moved into 2022, now we're about to hit 2023. Major events throughout the year that stand out in my memory feel as though they happened yesterday, while at the same time seem to have only taken about 5 minutes to experience. Time almost feels like it has less and less meaning the more that it goes on. It's difficult to explain. 2021 had a lot of great moments. My entire family took a family vacation on a scale that we hadn't attempted in decades. I got the chance to take my mom to the College World Series so she could watch her alma mater do something that had never happened in their athletic history and win a national title. My sister-in-law and her husband moved across the country to become our next door neighbors, allowing my wife to live next door to one of her closest companions for the first time in 10 years. 2022 saw me achieve some professional goals that I had dreamed of doing for years. It saw me and my wife take a big trip, just the two of us, the first time that we had really taken a trip on any big scale by ourselves since we got married. There's a lot of good stuff that's happened the past 2 years. I find myself wishing that it could all be separated a bit better in my brain. As I've gotten older, I've taught myself to love a routine, because loving a routine has never been natural to me. I've always loved being spontaneous and instantaneous, but I had to teach myself how to love a routine in order to better function as an adult. And I've really come to learn and appreciate a process. It's a beautiful thing. I say that to then say, I've mentioned before that I've always had to deal with my ADHD. But in my 30s, I've encountered a huge amount of new challenges at work, at home, emotionally, physically. And through all of that, I've had to learn a lot more about ADHD and the neurodiverse brain to better understand how to manage what was going on in my head. The major factor of ADHD is that the brain doesn't quite produce the same amount of dopamine as a neurotypical brain, and therefore tends to try to crave dopamine more. And hey, what do you know? That's going to explain so many of the impulsive and also addictive behaviors that I've come to identify within myself over the years. And so one way for me to fight that constant desire for dopamine was to learn to love the process of things and not just chasing the reward. I've come to really love coffee, not for the caffeine that it brought, but because I enjoy the process of testing out different coffee beans, grinding them fresh, trying different brewing methods. I learned to love music, not just because of the experience of being overwhelmed by beautiful sound, but because I loved the tactile experience of picking a record, cleaning it, placing it carefully on the record player, and then letting the music happen. I learned to love cooking, not simply to enjoy a meal, but because I loved tinkering with a recipe and a cooking technique and trying to figure out how to make it better than the last time I made it. It's all a process. These are the processes that I love, and they come with good end results. But I had to learn to love those processes, and in a weird way, I had to fall in love with the pursuit of dopamine and not just the dopamine itself. So I've come to love a process, and in that process, well, that was not an intentional play on words, I apologize. But learning to love the process has made me a better video editor. Now, not a good video editor, but a better one than I was. It's made me love the tedious process of editing that I used to despise. It's helped me fall in love with a grind in a video game. With repetition, it makes it so much more satisfying for me when I play a favorite RPG like Persona 5 or when I go back to Final Fantasy Tactics. I've said it before, and honestly, I've said it more than I ever should on this stupid YouTube channel, but I've always felt that the meaning of life, to me at least, is to become the best version of myself. I've felt that life is a constant progression to being more of who you are. And now at the ripe old age of 34, a couple months removed from 35, after years and years of dedicating myself to this idea of always trying to be a better version of myself, I have to ask myself an important question. Is this, in my mid-30s, who I am right now, is this as good as it gets? This isn't to say that I can't do some things better in life. After all, I never want to assume that I don't have more to learn, or I don't have more to accomplish, that I don't have more room to grow. But at my core, me, the core of my human being, is this who I am ultimately meant to be? Maybe I'm not supposed to actually get any better at video editing than I am right now. Maybe I'm just supposed to keep rolling with the skills I have. Maybe I'm not really supposed to get much better at IT stuff like my job would ask me to or demand me to. Maybe I'm supposed to lean more into things that I'm more obviously, at this point in my life, already good at. Hosting events, putting on productions, broadcasting, etc. Not that I can't or won't do things that I'm not naturally as good at, but maybe I'm at a stage of life in which I should be focusing more on those things than I am good at. Maybe this being the best version of myself idea doesn't mean that I have to develop a bunch of new skills as I keep going. Maybe it means that I have the skills I need, and I should be doing things that I'm already good at instead of trying all the time to chase after getting better at other things. I think about all of this because the same question has to be asked about Final Fantasy Tactics. Google the game. Do it right now as I'm speaking, and take a moment to kind of figure out and process what you're seeing when you Google it. You'll probably find a lot of blog posts and forum posts and social media rants about how badly fans of the game want it to be remade or remastered or re-released on something that isn't a handheld device. We want it to get the grand redone treatment that other games of the era have received. There are most likely more posts about those demands than there are posts about the actual game. It's why so many people prefer to play the game on an emulator with those quality of life mods that improve the core of the game, because we just want the game to have the respect that it deserves. But that's the important thing. Yes, you have mods that do change the core of the game to give you a new experience based on the game engine, but the mods that improve the quality of life make it a point not to change the core of the game. It's been 25 years since Final Fantasy Tactics was released, and besides War of the Lions, a re-release with a few bonus features on the PSP, the PlayStation Portable of all systems, besides this War of the Lions, there's been nothing. You can't find this game on Steam. It's one of, best I can tell, only 2 Final Fantasy games that aren't on Steam. The other one being Crystal Chronicles. You remember Crystal Chronicles? Even Crystal Chronicles got re-released on modern consoles, and Tactics can't even get put out on the Switch. And oh man, it would at least be perfect on the Switch. Stop putting it on a cell phone. Put it on the Switch. Sorry, I got carried away. The question, though, begs to be asked, is the reason that we haven't seen the same level of remaster respect given to this game because Final Fantasy Tactics is already the best version of itself? Perhaps the graphical and programming limitations that existed in the mid-90s actually played a role in making it into the game that it was supposed to be. Maybe, as we're seeing now with the Final Fantasy VII remake, the technological advancements we've achieved in gaming will make an FFT remake or remaster too different to keep the charm that drew people to it 25 years ago. Maybe it had to be what it was created to be in the 1990s, with the limits on how many characters could be on screen and the pixel slowdown and all of those beautiful, beautiful flaws. Maybe this game had to be made exactly how it was, and a remake could not recapture that. Maybe Final Fantasy Tactics is the best version of Final Fantasy Tactics. Maybe that's the reason that tactical RPGs, even to this day, are inevitably compared to it. Maybe that's why I replay it every year or so, and I still haven't ever replayed Fire Emblem Three Houses, or I haven't made any real progress in Fell Seal, or Children of the Zodiacs, or Triangle Strategy, or really any other tactical RPG. Maybe there is a reason for all of this. I had a conversation with my sister-in-law, my new neighbor, not too long ago, where she said something to me about learning that our 30s are when we make attempts to reclaim our childhoods. It seems like we all have to find out what that means for us. I know for me, a major part of it has been buying toys again after not doing so for about 20 years. But we have to attempt this reclamation of youth because we've been told all during our 20s and our adult years that we ought to be looking for ways to become more successful, to climb a career path, to give back more, to be involved more, to have more, and to have more responsibility. And hear me clearly when I say that it's not a bad thing to be looking for all of that. We should always be growing as people and becoming better versions of ourselves. I say that a lot, and so I say that again now. It's something that, we should be doing. I still firmly believe that we're never really done in becoming the better version of ourselves that we should seek after day and year after year. But we slip up and we fail ourselves when we change from the desire to do better and instead start listening to the external shoulds of our lives. When we drift away from an inward desire to grow and focus on an outward pressure that says we should be doing more each day to prove our value. We don't have a thing to prove when it comes to our value, but I feel that pressure constantly. I wake up most mornings wondering what I should be doing that day to maximize the efficiency of the day, and then I go to bed most nights wondering if I should have done something differently. It's the aspect of myself that honestly frustrates me the most, because it betrays the things that I love about myself. I love my dumb, independent nature. I love my stupid personality. I love that my favorite thing to do on any given day is to pick a hole-in-the-wall restaurant and go on a food adventure. I love the blend of the routine and the impulsivity. But when I bend to the will of the shoulds, then I betray myself. And there will always be an aspect of my annual return to Final Fantasy Tactics that is a return to myself. It doesn't matter if I'm playing it in the background as I do other things, or if I'm fully invested in everything that's happening on the screen. It doesn't matter if I'm in love with the process, or if I only want to speed things along to get to the results of the random encounter and earn some XP. Whatever the reasoning is for my return to the video game equivalent of comfort food, it's just that. It's a return. Final Fantasy Tactics has always been and will always be a return home, a return to this magical world of Ivalice, and a return to who I really am, so that when I leave again, I leave it as myself, not as who I'm told I should be. I realize I look ridiculous right now. Look, I'm a nostalgic person, and sitting here in my 30s, I realize that there is a fine line between nostalgia and obsession. I mean, here I am right now, trying to work on a video essay about a game that came out 25 years ago. There are times in which I long for the days when I was younger, and there was a more active music scene going on in my city, or there were more block parties going on in the neighborhood that we're involved in. When the neighborhood was up and coming, it was the place where people were moving back to. I find myself a lot of times also thinking about the projects I've worked on over the years. The podcasts, the YouTube videos, the writing projects, the blogs, whatever they are, the old stuff that I kind of sometimes wish more had come out of. I think about my efforts to be involved in my local community, in my neighborhood, and supporting local businesses, being a part of local events during times where not as much of that was happening. I'm proud of the projects. I'm proud of the involvement. I'm proud of the events. I'm proud of the community. I don't want that to be lost in what I'm saying here. Those things can become shoulds in life. The past can become a should. Man, that YouTube channel should have done more. That blog I wrote should have been turned into a book or a writing career. The community involvement should have led to more. It's easy for the past to become a should. And I realize that because I catch myself missing those days a bit too much sometimes. I tell myself that I should keep a blog alive that died years ago, and I just didn't want to admit it. Or I should revive an old project, all the while kind of scratching my head wondering where all the people have gone who were alongside me in the past. The truth is, though, that when I really look at it, the work has been done. The blogs, the videos, the community events, whatever they were, they served their purpose. They were good. New faces live here and are involved here because of the work that so many of us did 10 years ago to make this a place where people wanted to come. Maybe older projects didn't lead to end results that I hoped that they would at the time, but that doesn't mean that they weren't worth following through on, that they weren't worth doing. The skills I picked up on them helped pave the way for new things. The fact of the matter is, as I wrote about 2021 kind of flying by on me, 2022 doing the same, for the past couple of years, I've been a bit down on myself. I've been a bit in a creative slump, wondering where the days have gone and not really realizing that the days have gone where they were supposed to go. And now it's time for me to do the same. I need to look forward to something new. I need to set my eyes, set my direction forward, and not always looking back in the past. Nick Carraway was right. You can't repeat the past. But Jay Gatsby wasn't far off either. His problem was he thought his green light, his future, was based in his past. And it really wasn't. Gatsby was right in his optimism for a brighter future, but he never realized that he was looking backwards the whole time. So it's time for me to wrap up my work here on Super Squad D, at least with these video essays, these pre-recorded videos. And I think it's fitting. I think it's fitting that my last video essay about a video game should be this one. This one about probably my favorite game of all time. And I think it's also fitting that it should be a video essay that I've struggled to write for the better part of 2 years. I think it's all pretty fitting. So, thank you. Thank you for watching these videos over the years. It means a lot. Thank you for your support, and I hope that you join me in something new, in moving forward, in wherever the future takes all of us. I hope you join me. I'm not going away. I'm just going somewhere place different. Thank you.